cut it down to a volume no more than an inch thick. We got ready to go. We had 27,000 people and 500 airplanes on an inch thick communication program. And I came back to Colin later on, and I told him in the Joint Staff, I said, you better fix this for good, because, I mean, the only reason I got it fixed because I'm a derivative of the grenade operation. I know about it. Somebody else come along, doesn't know anything about it, and they'll get screwed up again. So they had time to fix it in the Persian Gulf, because they had 6 months to sort it out. But those are some top of the mind sort of things. And I'll try to do a little more research about that. Let's talk a little bit about it next week. Chances are probably 90-10. I'm going to turn in the hospital on Sunday. And I'm going to be in there for 10 days getting a dose of chemo.
Johns Hopkins, or is it Walter?
No, we're at Walter Reed. So, they will permit me to do some work. Depending upon how I'm feeling, okay?
Okay.
So at the moment, the Undersecretary of the Army wants to see me on Tuesday at 12:30. So you can either come earlier or you can come later. On Tuesday. That's the 15th. But the period 11 to 2 o'clock is not available.
When you're going through this, do you feel like doing more than one thing in a day?
Yeah, I mean, you can come over and set the tape recorder up over there in Ward 72. We just do it up here in my room.
Is there a phone number that I can call to check and see if you feel like doing it?
Yeah, what you can do, one is I'll call you on the Sunday and tell you what I'm doing, okay? And then I can give you a phone number. The phone number at Ward 72 is area code 202-576-1772. And then you can call Ward 72 and I can tell you yea or nay.
Well, I'd be happy to show up at 1400 if back to
Okay,
back
yeah,
is all right with
I'll
you.
be back. I should be back by 1400 because I got to go see the Secretary of the Pentagon. So, I mean, what they have to do is they have to give me a shot in the morning, a shot in the afternoon, and then I have to watch what I eat and all that kind of stuff because they're beginning to kill off my white cells. So,
How are you
we'll see
doing?
how it goes. Huh?
How are you doing?
Well, I'm doing fine except for the platelets. Platelets are crashing. So this will be another rescue operation, see if we can.
Will the white cells eat the platelets?
No, they're all on different cell lines, but when you get a chemotherapy, it kills off all the lines. There's something eating up the platelets, so we're trying to kill off the platelet eater. But meanwhile, when you kill off the platelet, you kill off the whites and the reds. So then, obviously, you end up under a transfusion routine.
How are your veins doing?
They're fine.
Are they?
Yeah, I mean, healthy veins.
That's wonderful.
You get shot full of shit and just keep on trucking.
That's great. That's
Not a problem.
doing a fantastic job with this. General Thurman called on Monday night before our appointment to say that he couldn't meet on Tuesday at 2 o'clock, and that I should come at 10. I did, and I arrived at 10, and he had already left. There was no note or explanation. I called him several times through the day, and when he finally had come back in, we agreed to meet on Wednesday at 1 o'clock. Yes, sir. Fascinating document. And did you say you'd written an article that's tells about the second 10 years?
Yeah. It's an article that says what we did, okay? There was sort of the notion when all that went down that we could not achieve what it was we set out to achieve. And so they asked me to give a presentation to the 20th anniversary group. And what I did was I took, I think, the 11 see, economists believe it's all an economic function. Supply and demand, use of monetary incentives. And while there's a great deal of that, there are also managerial and leadership, data gathering, research, automatic data processing, truth in lending. There's a lot of other things that go along with correct advertising program and all that stuff, which go along with it. And so what I tried to do in this article was capture the 11 leading things that we did, which caused then this stuff that they said couldn't be done to come to fruition. It was widely accepted in the community that you saw there, economists and like, they couldn't be done.
Is that article published somewhere?
No, I have a copy of it. It will be published. It has been turned back into Annapolis for the purpose of codifying the results of the 20th anniversary thing. So when they publish it, I don't know. I don't know how long it took them to get this one out.
It came out in '86.
Okay, so that's 3 years.
Yeah.
So I'll get you a copy of it ahead of time. I'll get you a copy of it now. Some of the guys are here. Richard Danzig, for example. Marty Benkin is a guy that's made a living in all this stuff on the Brookings Institution. David Chu was PA&E for the Department of Defense for 10 years. Richard Danzig is now the Undersecretary of the Navy. Bill DePuy is now dead. Herb Greenberg is one of these guys that's been on and on in the business. Bob Hale is a CBO guy now. Larry Korb, the infamous Larry Korb, that has an opinion on everything.
What's the CBO?
Huh?
CBO, Bob Hale.
Bob Hale.
Used to be at Office of Naval Research, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Charlie Moskos, you know well. Bob Murray is the head of CNA today, Center for Naval Analysis. Phil O'Dean is the chairman of the board of BDM Corporation. Stan Reeser, the retired Secretary of the Army. Bernie Rusker is a big functionary in RAND. There's a guy named Weinberg. And John White was the author of the plan for Ross Perot's economic plan for America. So, I mean, it was a fairly rich group of people who gathered on that thing in terms of putting their intellectual competency at work on a vexing matter called the all-volunteer service.
Danzig in particular seems like he's one of these guys who sees through the core of things. He worked pretty much with you, and he was in the DOD, was he?
Yes, he was. He was the deputy in manpower and reserve affairs at the time.
Well, since I saw you last, I got some stuff on confusion in Vietnam.
Okay, good. What'd you find out?
Well, I found out that 54th Group got very interested in it and early summer of spring of '67. And
Was it unique to that group?
no, but they got a jump on things because the first regulation came out in, I think, June of '67.
It was a USRV rate?
USRV rate.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, there's no copy of the original reg, the 21 June '67 reg in the National Archives. I may find one somewhere else, but there's none there. But apparently it was permissive and said this would be a good idea. Essentially what you should do if you're a division commander or a artillery group commander or something is swap people back and forth so that no more than 25% of a battalion rotates in 1 month.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, that goal to be achieved within 6 months of the country. After arriving in Vietnam, and get it down to 15% within a year and a half. The reg that came out on 26th of July, but which obviously there have been some twixes or advance notice coming to the units in the spring of '68. July '69. It meant July '68. The reg came out, but there must have been.
You said 67 to start with.
67 to start with. That was a permissive reg.
Yeah.
In July of '68, the
More mandatory.
mandatory reg came out, and but it's evident from the reports made by 54th Group that they anticipated the mandatory reg well in advance.
And it did in the 5th to the 42nd or whatever.
Well,
What's the number on that?
well, we think it's 5th to the 42nd.
Yeah.
I've looked at their ORLLs throughout their first year. I've never mentioned it. But in their first quarter, they had a turnover of 45 people or so, and in their second quarter, they had a turnover of 115. And the second quarter was the May, June, July. So they came in April. And, so their the second quarter, that May, June, July quarter was turnover for about 40 people and turnover of about 110.
Which means that they all didn't leave country, they moved someplace else.
They got switched.
Yeah. It was 110 people gone, and that period of time would have been astronomical.
They did a job on your battalion in the spring of '67. So well
That's before I took it over.
Right. Before you even got there, there was a great deal of concern about that one. And, there were 105 people infused during the May, June, July period.
Summer of '67.
Their hump was March, April, May.
Mm-hmm.
They had 21, 22, and 17% rotating in those 3 months. The other months they had 3 to 8% rotating. So they felt they pretty well achieved their objective by now. It's interesting to see how enthusiastic back even before the USRV reg was written. The 54th Group got into
Was this still John J. Norris was commanding?
It was before him.
Mm-hmm.
When he came in, he decided that the infusion program wasn't worth a damn, and he became more
Reluctant to do it?
well, no, more enthusiastic about doing it.
He thought it wasn't worth a damn, and
It
then
wasn't
became...
strong enough.
Oh, I see.
And he said he had 5 complaints when he took command, and one of them was that the group had no infusion plan to cope with excessive personnel rotations, particularly in the 7th and the 9th, and the 7th and the 8th. he also, of 5 things that he had to complain about the group when he took over, 2 of them had to do with this. The other was the staff effectiveness at group level was shattered by the deroes of all the primary staff officers of the group during the period 8-24 August. So he was big on this.
Sounds exciting. No wonder I got no orders on
Sounds like they wanted to break
it. Yeah. But there was a user directive.
There was a USRB directive.
Yeah.
And it didn't, the only thing, it didn't reference anything from McAfee, and it referenced a couple of ARs, which I have not yet looked up, but I suspect that they will be just something like,
Bland.
you know,
Yeah. Okay. Hump reductions. There will be no humping in our units. Okay.
One of the interesting things in the 3rd incarnation of the USRB reg was that we're not to infuse people who have already been infused once. So
No reinfusions.
no reinfusion. Other than that,
That's called stability.
right.
It's called infusion stability, which is an oxymoron.
I have a couple of operational report lessons learned for your battalion during your period of command, which I didn't have before.
Okay. Good. One February 68 and one May 68. Okay, it must be a quarterly report.
Quarterly report, yes. And one of these is the one where you describe one of your batteries working in the Delta.
Mhm.
Apparently there's quite a bit of pioneering going on there. Make an outfit like as heavy as the Delta.
Yep. All right, sir.
One of the things that seems to be really crucial in the renaissance of the Army struck me as the transforming the group of senior enlisted people into a real NCO corps. And such things as in the NCO education system, taking charge of promotions, making promotions in the MOSs where there were vacancies rather than across the board, and paying attention to families and the rotational turmoil that these people went through. And it sounds like a lot of people were into this. There was a lot of training involved. There was a lot of action by local commanders. And there were a lot of personnel changes, and I wondered what sort of battles had to be fought, and what sort of coordination did you have to do with this took place over a long period. It seems like this took place over about a 15-year period. The first emergence of the first NCO academies to the, let's say, 88, 89 period. And I wondered if there was opposition. I've read in the Army Times that there was a lot of opposition among NCOs to going to school. I wondered if there was there probably was some opposition among people in overstrength MOSs to running the promotion schools.
Yeah, I think if you sort of look at maybe we can hit a couple points. One point would be the establishment of NCO schools. Let's just talk about that for a minute. Even as far back as my days in the 11th Airborne Division as a lieutenant, there was a post-school system. There was a post-NCO academy and a post-officer training system to do the kinds of training that Wayne C. Smith wanted to get done. So there's a long heritage of post-NCO schools, which took on a life of their own in that they could be tailored for the needs of the specific post. And so a lot of them had post or divisional unique curricula. So there was a legacy of a substantial amount of autonomy for the NCO school that was run on a post-campus station. Now, by the time in early '70, when I'm down at the 82nd, there's a full-up going post-NCO school. There is a school where corporals were sent, people were getting ready to be sort of first gradation of NCO school. But meanwhile, in the same time in the 70s, Paul Gorman and Bill DePue and later Don Starry at TRADOC were beginning to look at a certain amount of standardization of material that would be taught in various and sundry post-NCO schools. Now, at that time, it was not envisioned that you would have the NCO school, BNOC, what we now know as BNOC, Basic NCO Training School, or the ANOC, the Advanced NCO School, that they would necessarily, they weren't in view yet, and that the fact that they would be lodged at the service schools branch schools was not yet operative. So you had this corpus of responsibility where division commanders thought a lot of those schools, spent a lot of energy into them, put a talented staff of NCOs that they may have dragooned from various and sundry units to go down and do special duty down there.
Had to do it all out of their hide, didn't they?
Yep. And but the upshot was there was a lot of local pride in that particular school system because it serves our particular needs and the like. When Gorman and DePue come along, and later Starry, and then tried to put a umbrella program called the NCOES, the Non-Commissioned Officer Education System, into being, then it runs headlong at the beat up on the post-camp and station guys who are running their own fiefdoms down there. So it was to be expected that a certain amount of resistance would come up and say, gee whiz, we know what we're doing. And then there was a struggle for resources about that said, well, if we're going to do these things at the TRADOC school systems, then you don't need to do that down at the local post-campus station. Therefore, we can rip off the spaces it may be for that, or the spaces that are being sucked out of units can be returned to normal duty. And then you would get into such things as, well, but the merits of the training that you're going to do at the NCOES at the TRADOC schools is not relevant to our mission. We've got a relevant mission down there. Well, so the compromise about all that started out with, well, you continue to do what you're doing down there, and we'll set up the advanced non-commissioned officer school. And that would be oriented on platoon sergeants and the like. And you guys down there do the basic NCO stuff, which is sort of map reading and weapons firing and all that kind of stuff. And then as evolution will, the second iteration of all that said, all right, even the NCOs who come to school at the grade of E5 will come to school at the service school, branch school, as opposed to being done at the post-camp station, because that way you don't have to tie up Bradleys and howitzers and tanks and all that, because we already have all this equipment at the various and sundry service schools. Which then said, well, what do we do with our NCO school up there? What do we teach here? And then that's when we came up with the primary NCO course, the PNOC. And we said the PNOC will be run at the post-camping station. It'll work out of the corpus of the previous all-powerful NCO school. So that left some local autonomy. And guys and gals who would go to that would be people who are coming up on promotion to, or have been promoted to Spec 4. And sort of would be assistant squad leader kind of folks and section chiefs or number one guys. So every time you made one of these rip-offs of installation people, you'd get a Donnybrook going. So those things had to be solved by work by TRADOC on the one hand, endorsement by chiefs of staff on the other, and by negotiation with the Forces Command and Europe by then. And invariably, that became a major issue to be considered in one of the semi-annual Army Commanders Conferences. That subject would be put on the table, and the commander of TRADOC would get up there, and the rest of the commanders would beat up on the commander of TRADOC, and he'd make certain decisions about it, and the chief would decide, and it'd be going down the road about that. Now, all of that is building up the corpus of TRADOC. It's getting bigger.
Right?
Because it's got all these institutional schools that's been put together there.
It has more of a grasp on the mind of the Army, too. Because it's,
Yeah, but everybody was perfectly understandable about it with officers.
yeah.
But if you said I had to send NCOs to that, then the question was, who pays the TDY cost?
Right.
It costs a lot of money to not PCS, but send them to TDY, so division had to cough up the money. Well, previously, if it was the NCO school on the post, they didn't have to cough it up. The guy just went over there and did his duty. So there were additional costs now about trying to go to a more standardized structure about that. And then you get into the question, well, how many weeks is it? And how many weeks can you afford TDY and the like? Okay, so if a division got scrimped, it wouldn't send anybody. It wouldn't meet his quota.
Right.
Then you'd get quota problems going. Well, who's issuing the quotas? Well, TRADOC didn't issue them, they were issued from mill percent. So you'd issue a quota from mill percent down to Force Com, and they'd farm it out down below, and then you'd say, well, gee whiz, people didn't show up at the school. So you had a compliance problem of getting the people from where they were.
Because mill percent didn't have any vested interest in it happening.
Well, mill percent would complain that people earmarked, people who were supposed to have gone to school didn't go, and therefore their records were incomplete because they hadn't been. And you'd find that, well, we couldn't afford the TDY to send them someplace because somebody comes down and issues a rule, you got to cut your TDY count by 20%. So it's this mixture of activities that breeds some reluctance on the part of post-camp station commanders to give up their own organic NCO school. The next leg in this saga comes in, well, is it required for promotion? If you believe that paradigm that I gave you before about training people in the Army, you educate them or train them for a job, then you let them do the job in practicum, and then you measure them and see how successful they were, and you give them more education to step up to the next bat at the plate. So the question then came, well, can you hold people accountable that a prerequisite for promotion to grade E7 would be having completed the BNOC? Well, then you'd get the complaint, well, gee whiz, it wasn't my fault I didn't go to BNOC. We didn't have enough money, or my commander didn't send me, or whatever. So then the question came down, well, who's in charge of all this? Is it the unit commander? Is he obligated to do it? Is it Milperson to get the money lined up so they can do it? And why do we have to send them off to TRADOC when we can do it locally at cheaper costs? So I think you're right. I think that there was a considerable amount of agony to get it all pieced together.
Who are the daddy rabbits of this sort of thing? Like,
Well, it started with the well, there were a variety of people about that. I would say to you that Gorman and Depew started it out. Certainly Starry, he started the Master Gunner program down at Knox, so he was interested in it. Bill Richardson was heavily involved in it. And
was he a TRADOC commander?
yeah, he followed Starry. No, I beg your pardon, Otis followed Starry, and then Richardson came after Otis. Then Bono, then me. So constant amount of turmoil on who's in charge, who issues orders, does it count for promotion, who's got the money, did you make, you were issued the billet, you Thurman were issued instructions to get to the school Monday week and you didn't show up, why didn't you? And the unit commander said, because I need him here in the unit. So there was a considerable amount of consternation about that, and then I think, and I can't remember what year it was, we took to Wickham a decision that would say, if you haven't been to school, you can't get promoted. Now that put the final teeth into it. That said, we do mean that we're going to educate our NCOs, and we've gotten very rigorous about that.
Was this when you were vice or desk per?
That latter is when I am the vice, the last point, where it says, okay, now it's tied to promotion, and if you don't get promoted, if you don't go to school, you don't get promoted.
One of the things that
But that didn't occur like overnight with Wickham. I mean, he had to be
persuaded.
and cajoled and all that, because he remembered his days at famous downtown Fort Campbell with the 101st when he commanded, and he looked at that as, well, I'm giving up prerogatives that a division commander ought to rightfully have. Then you had problems, if you had people in Korea, you had people in Germany, you send them back from overseas, can you afford all the so
enormous cost, yeah.
big cost, big problem. But I think we've got it under control now. Reasonable. It is a requirement for promotion. It has some degree of central management in terms that there's money set aside at the departmental level to take care of that, as opposed to whipsawing the unit about that.
Has it been worked into the PCS process, like when
Yeah, if you're trying to get them on the PCS process, going home or coming back, one of the two. Although neither of those is very satisfying for the family,
No, it's true.
because you don't want the family put up in a motel for 6 weeks at Fort Dix, New Jersey, waiting for their husband to get through the BNOC so he can go overseas.
I guess it'd be better if he's already stationed somewhere.
Right.
And meanwhile, another leg of that stool was you're bringing in smarter people.
Yeah.
Who might not be as frightened of school and who might be able to handle it better.
Well, you sort of had a twofold thing going on there. You had one is you had smarter people coming in who could absorb faster, and then unit commanders would say, well, they don't need to go to NCO school. They already know things. They don't need to know that. They already got it. But we persisted in saying, no, there is an NCO rigorous training system for that. So yeah, it took a long time, mid-70s to late 80s.
so that was quite an operation.
And it is, when I was down in Southcom, I brought a couple of my colleagues up to TRADOC. Blew their mind how much money we invest in non-commissioned officers. That they don't. We have the finest non-commissioned officer board in the world. It's because we spend money and train them.
They are extraordinary. Of course, the privates are extraordinary now also.
Yep.
There's another thing, I don't know whether I ought to drive the agenda here on what you did while you were the vice, because you're pulling so many things together. One of the things that intrigued me that I read about in the outbrief, the senior officer's outbrief, was we were having the results of performance of units at the National Training Centers evaluated, and also
I did that more in my TRADOC days.
did you do that in trade-off things?
Yeah, what I did in the what I learned as the vice was that we were not getting enough data out of the many replications of attacks and defenses at the National Training Center and plowing it back into our combat developments or our training system. And that originally got sort of boilerplated when Shoemaker was the commander of Forces Command and Starry was the commander of the Training and Doctrine Command. It said at the NTC, we're not counting scores with one battalion versus another. So, because we don't want any bumper numbers, we're not trying to impugn the battalion commander, we're trying to learn how to do things. But having said that, one of the things that would mask is what are the really good officers and who are the in units, and what units need work in specific lines of work, and then how are they handling the weapon systems which we paid a fancy price for, and are we getting the most out of the weapon system? So having sort of come to know that when I was the vice chief, when I got down to TRADOC, I sent the first guy I sent to the NTC was the infantry guy. Turned out it was Bill Hartzell. He was the assistant commandant at Fort Benning, Georgia at the time. But I took one CMF or branch, like infantry, armor, field artillery, took one a month. And I put together a team of guys under the assistant commandant, and I said, go out there and inspect the data, because we had tons of it at the Army Research Institute in Monterey. And I want you to look at the data any way you want to look at the data, but I want you to tell me what are the top 10 things we're not doing well in your branch. So we got something to work on. So they'd come down, they'd list for tanks, it may be a river crossing operation or whatever. In the case of infantry, which the first one was about, the number one item on the agenda was the fact that TOWs were not killing up to the max range on the one hand, or up to their weapons probability of kill at which we'd bought the weapons system. And so there were steps we had to take to go cure that. Part of the steps, we had to go ahead and make a fix on the bore sighting devices associated with the laser guided system that we were using here, the Miles system. We had to create new ways for them to communicate in order to get quickly from one position to another if you wanted to get your counterattack going or bring in your other forces, so that you could measure the rate of response of a commander issuing orders and getting the vehicles moved from one place to another. We had to take into consideration that the bore sight apparatus itself was not very well done on a Bradley, and so we had to go repair it. All of this was to build confidence because the opening ranges were about 1,100 meters when they should have been 3,000. And so having gone through every one of the systems, whether it was engineers on demolitions or engineers on covering obstacles and the like appropriately, we found out that only 3 and 5 obstacles were covered by either direct or indirect fire. Then when we actually probed the obstacle, you'd find that you couldn't get the artillery registration, not the registration, but the artillery concentrations dumped on the obstacle, which is something everybody knows. I mean, you'd think everybody knows that. But it came down to what you told where you told the platoon leader to go into position, what he did with the organization position, what the artillery guy did to put a goose egg around it if you're going to have a final protective fire or anything of that nature. So none of the things I have said to you sound very spiffy or anything. They're common, ordinary attributes that you would perceive that any unit would have, but you found out they weren't doing this. So you had to train them to do it in order to get more efficiency out of the system. So we worked every one of the commandants through each one of their systems in order to try to get a fair shake at what the problems were about all that.
Did Signal
Sort of
get
a
in-
one-a-month grant.
Did Signal get into the picture? So many things are now.
Yeah, I think the signal guys got into it, but I can't recall any startling thing, but
Does the miles system take into account the fact that the miles that the tow gunner has to maintain lock on his target for 10 or 15 seconds?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it would be terrible if the equipment lied. If you had what looked like a lock, or you had a...
Well, worse than that, it had to do with the fact that you had a dissipated laser beam at extreme range, 3,000 meters, because at the lower ranges you had unable to make things come to an agreeable combat outcome about that.
That miles system, was that one of Gorman's ideas?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Change the Army.
Changed the Army. Major change.
Instead of bullshitting about it, you actually had troops saying, I got shot. Why'd you get shot? Not because it said bang bang, because actually she got shot. He said, well, I got up from behind the log too quick. Well, let's go back and do it again. Stay behind the log longer. Very effective feedback apparatus.
Marvelous. There are ways of cheating it, though, I think. Taking the batteries out, things like that.
Well, I'm sure there were. But, the principle pertained, and most people are reasonably straightforward about that. They were motivated to save their lives, so I think most people, I think the cheating aspect is slim. I don't know, maybe more than I suspected, but I think it's slim.
Well, it all depends on what, it's the Vince Lombardi thing. Is winning everything or is learning everything? I think perhaps that mindset shifted over time during the life from the time the NTCs were set up till now. As the vice, you were involved in procurement also, sort of overseeing.
Well, I had a
Procurement.
regulatory function in the Department of the Army to be the co-chair of the Acquisition Review Committee. So every weapons system that was brought forth for a milestone review, I co-chaired that with the then Undersecretary of the Army, Jim Ambrose. And So we would spend days on certain weapon systems, looking at the guts of what the program was all about and trying to figure out whether or not they were ready to go to test or not. So some we won, some we didn't win. Like, we did okay on Patriot, ultimately it came in and did very well. One we didn't do very well was the Kila program, which was a unmanned aerial vehicle, which finally had to be killed because it couldn't pass the test.
Was it a reconnaissance vehicle or
No, it's a reconnaissance, aerial reconnaissance vehicle. And actually, it's a pretty good vehicle. It just had too many bells and whistles on it, and then the testers didn't know how to test it, so they killed it. And we had the DivAd was in there. We killed the DivAd. And so that it was that took up an enormous amount of time.
Because you had to have a very finely grained bullshit screen to filter out what the contractors were telling you, didn't you?
Well, these briefings in the main were conducted by the project managers, so they were all Army guys. Now, both Jim and I made room, not at the ASARC, not at the Army Systems Acquisition Review Council, but privately we would hold sessions with the vendors, and they could tell us what they thought about it. And I used to have a meeting with the vendors about once every 2 months on